What's going on, everybody? I'm here with Michael Cotton. He is a man of many trades. Michael Cotton is the Chief Product Officer of Optio Capital, an Australian investment firm focused on blockchain investments. He's the co-founder of Algomint, a digital asset minter on Algorand, and the founder of Meld Gold, digital currencies backed by gold and silver, and potentially maybe other commodities. We'll get into that in a little bit. But Michael, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come on our show. I know we've spoke in the past before, but you're one of my favorite people to talk to in the space. So appreciate you coming on. How you doing today?
Ladies and gentlemen.
Good, JT. Thanks, mate. Really appreciate it. And thanks for having me as always.
Absolutely. You know, it's my pleasure. I know I've been doing my own thing just now for about a week, so you're the third guest I've had on my channel since I've started posting on it again, and super excited to have this conversation because we just spoke to Benedetto of Folks Finance about the real world assets that are coming to their platform. We talked about it before we started recording that real world assets are really becoming a theme of crypto broadly, but certainly Algorand. So I want to jump, before we get into real world assets, I just want to take it from the top so people understand who you are and what you do in this space. So could you sort of explain what your role is at Optio Capital and how that giant umbrella sort of unfolds?
Yeah, certainly. So my official title is Chief Product Officer, which in reality means I focus on reviewing potential investments, their product strategies, their economic strategies, their go-to-market in relative to their product, relative to their competitors. So really sort of digging into, is this product solid? Is it interesting? Does it have a good economical fit? Does it have a good business model? And what does the landscape look like in terms of going to market? How difficult is this product going to be to launch? And how much competition are they going to see in what kind of time frame? So like a really good example of what that might look like is someone could have a really great idea, but the competitors are immense and very, very well funded and established, which proposes a different set of problems. And so then you're looking at things like, all right, is this project the kind of project that could be acquired by a competitor, or are they actually going to be better positioned to actually go into a combative mode and actually compete against the product? So there's a lot of these kinds of things that we look at, and then also looking at, specifically what kind of IP these products have, and do they have a really strong IP moat around the business itself? On a more sort of nitty gritty level, we then also, the companies we do invest into, we advise and we work really closely with around helping them along that journey as well. So AJ Milne, Optio Capital's CEO, the two of us work side by side and really helping with our different skill sets around the companies we do invest into and how we can actually help support them through their journey.
Fantastic. So how many companies are part of the Optio investment portfolio?
I'm probably not going to get this right, but I'm going to be close. I'm going to say 35. So, give or take a smidgen either side would be accurate.
And are they largely all focused on Algorand, or is it cross-chain? How does that work?
No, it is cross-chain. So we do have a multi-chain focus. We in terms of the mandate, we look at the different blockchains, look at what we think their focuses are as a chain, what we think their future strategy looks like, where they're putting their energy, because that can be a really important factor. And I think a really good example of that is like Near Blockchain was a good example that I always sort of point to. They really decided that DeFi wasn't for them. So they weren't leaning into supporting DeFi, which is not to say you couldn't build DeFi there, but it wasn't a part of their mandate as a blockchain of what they're really going to put energy and resources behind. So it was a really good example where there's a very clear-cut case that you probably wouldn't look to invest in DeFi or Near when it's not something that particular chain wants to support. So, we often look at that as well and see where the fit might be right, because there's different use cases and different fits for different products that make a lot of sense. Another really good example is gas fees on Ethereum are incredibly high. So you wouldn't do a payment out in Latin America on chain on Ethereum because it really isn't functional for that type of user group. But if you've got someone building a DeFi product where the average transaction size is 100K plus, the transaction fees are probably less of an issue, and source of liquidity and where most of the funds are and where most of the utility could be found for those kind of applications becomes more important. So we definitely look at that in a sort of broad sense.
Fair enough. So if you could pick a favorite, I know you shouldn't pick favorites as somebody that might be high up on the team, and you might also have a bias because you also come from Meld Gold and Algomint. But if you could pick maybe 2 or 3 really interesting projects that are part of that portfolio, what would they be and what are they working on?
Oh, mate, all right. You make that really, that's actually a really scary question. Look, I'm going to actually say one that I think
We
is
could
just
skip over it.
No, that's all right. One I think that's actually quite fun is IWS, Illustrated World Series. I don't know if you're very familiar with the Illustrated World Series. I actually think it's a really, really fun project. It's a long running business where essentially it's a competitive illustrator competition. You've seen some incredible artists go through that competition and compete in this time-based competitive landscape of creating an artwork from an audience or a jury-supplied narrative, and then they get judged and rated. And I don't know if you've ever tuned in and watched any of the championships. There's actually one coming up. I think it's this week from memory. We've got one of the championships coming up this week. I just think that's a really interesting project. I think it's a lot of fun. I think creativity and proof of human creation is probably going to be more of an important piece for the future around creativity. But I think putting that on display and having people sort of flex their skills in a live format that's also timed, I think is something particularly interesting. So, I really like what the guys are doing. It's probably a little bit offbeat to the usual sort of pieces that we often are investing in, but I think that project is just quite fascinating, and they're doing some really interesting stuff. And, one of those good fun projects that I think is innovating in the NFT space as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. If you could send me a link to that contest, I'd actually love to check it out. I have not checked any of the prior ones out before, so I'd love to, get a peek on this one. That sounds really interesting.
For sure. It's 3 days, so day 2 and the finals are the best, which is not to say don't tune into all of it. Please feel free to do so. But, it's well worth a watch.
Beautiful. Perfect. So let's move on the conversation a little bit to some real world asset conversation, because it is, in my opinion, not only the theme of this current market, but I do believe it is what's going to propel blockchain and crypto over to mass adoption. I don't believe that DeFi speculation and everything that fueled the last bull run is going to be a sustainable path forward. I think this next bull run has to be fueled by these real world assets. I mean, just imagine if you could tokenize treasury bills or bonds and then also be able to put them up as collateral on a capital market protocol like Folks Finance. So I want to talk about how Meld Gold has been tokenizing gold and silver. I want to ask how that works. And then I want to ask, are there any other commodities that are coming on chain anytime soon?
Yeah, for sure. And look, I think probably the reason why we're seeing this sort of resurgence of, and probably less of a resurgence, but the new surge of real world assets coming on chain is blockchain really does offer a lot of value to real world assets and changes the dynamics for these kind of assets, especially when we're talking about physical assets like gold and silver that are quite cumbersome in their native format. The ability to digitize them and then be able to put them to work in a way with a kind of velocity that traditional fiat has received since it was digitized, I think is really, really interesting. I think also a lot of the use cases, such as taking a loan against gold, is a really, really obvious use case. And the ability to do that with minimal friction at an efficient rate, when that rate is often efficient due to the efficiencies of the blockchain utilization of lending. It's a much more straightforward process than a traditional process of having to take the gold, ensure it's genuine. You've got to then store it. You've got to then secure it. You've got to then insure it. You've then got to issue the loan. You've got to have a process to that person to come back and redeem it. You've got to monitor where it is and make sure it's held safely and in custody properly. Like, there's a lot of issues around these kind of assets being used as security in the traditional world that really gets solved in a very meaningful way through blockchain tech. So, I think it's a real obvious utilization on other ends. So when we talk about things like treasury bills, I think the utility of blockchain is slightly different, which is the ability for it to be more fungible in terms of the access. The ability to people to potentially participate in really micro formats, I think, will be quite interesting. And we're seeing with other things like Lofty Finance, the ability to buy properties at a $50 price. And gain access to an investment portfolio that maybe hasn't been accessible to most traditionally. And the key value prop there in terms of the blockchain has also got to be making sure you're building efficient systems around how it's managed on chain between the blockchain component and the real world component. There's not a lot of value gained if you can't also keep the rest of the piece efficient. So that's really where Meld Gold's focus is how do we efficiently manage the physical holdings while bringing them on chain and allowing people to find new utilities for those assets, such as going onto Folks Finance and taking out a loan and then going and buying more gold, or taking out a loan on your gold because you want to buy a house and you need a house deposit. and you don't necessarily want to liquidate your holdings. You don't necessarily want to crystallize capital gains tax. There's a whole heap of interesting benefits there. Or you're a gold mine and you actually don't want to liquidate your holdings because you actually want to retain your holdings, and instead you want to take a loan on some of the existing gold you have to fund additional mining operations. Like, there's a whole heap of additional use cases that are particularly interesting that we currently see play out in the real world that are made better through blockchain tech.
Right.
In terms of other assets, so Meld Gold already officially has Platinum and Palladium on chain. It just hasn't actually minted any yet.
Oh, really?
There's a few reasons for that. Partially, Palladium, which I think is a super interesting metal. It's one of the more used metals commercially these days, and it's an incredibly hard metal to actually acquire. It's not an investment commodity in every country of the world, so it poses a slightly different regulatory landscape than gold and silver. So it's a slightly tougher. Platinum is in a slightly similar boat, but it also is a little bit different in the sense that it's actually a very different set of equipment and refining equipment and producing equipment for minting bars than gold and silver. The reason being is the temperatures required and the hardness of those metals is quite different. So it's a very different product. And so gold and silver is very easy to be available globally, which Meld Gold's key goal is to not just distribute digitally, but distribute the physical holdings and make them redeemable in multiple locations around the world. So we're really focused on the gold and silver part, and once we can really get that piece really fine-tuned and ironed out, we can then look at expanding out to those additional metals. But one interesting piece for Meld Gold, which comes out, it'll be out by the time we broadcast, which is great, is the first collectible coin series that's backed with physical gold and silver, which comes out in the next, it would have been probably a day ago by the time we broadcast, but it's a Lunar Rabbit series of coins. There's 50 gold coins, 100 silver coins, and 200 bronze coins. It'll all be a part of the xNFT program, so Meld Gold's sponsoring them as prizes. You can only get one of these limited edition coins by owning some of the different xNFTs and competing to have some of the rarest. So the top 350 holders will receive one of these coins ranked in order. Each of the gold coins is backed by 1 gram of physical gold. You can actually burn the NFT to get $1 gold dollar. And each of the silver coins is backed by 10 grams of silver. So you can burn the silver coins and receive 10 silver dollars. This is a really traditional format for gold and silver. The Lunar series is one of the more famous series produced every year by mints such as the Perth Mint, the US Mint, the Canadian Mint. They all produce Lunar series each year. So this is sort of digitizing that same kind of a concept and start to produce these collectibles that more fit into the format of what we would have seen traditionally, but bringing it into the digital landscape. So I think this will be a first step into hopefully what we see as a more interesting area of NFTs that have some kind of intrinsic value.
Yeah, absolutely. So there was a lot there. So there's a lot to unpack. I do want to ask just real quick to move it back before we move forward into the xNFT, because I do want to pick your brain a little bit there. I'm curious, this might sound like a silly question, but how does Meld Gold acquire the gold and silver and other metals that they have? Is it, if I had gold, could I bring it to you and be like, I want this to be tokenized? How does this work?
Yeah, so you definitely can. So at the moment, you can only do that in one location, which is in Australia.
Right.
Alternatively, Meld Gold's core goal is it acts as the market maker between the traditional world and the digital world. So it signs up different market makers in the traditional world that aren't in the digital space themselves and acts as the market maker or the rails between those two worlds. So currently MKS Pant, which is one of the biggest gold traders in the world based out of Switzerland, is part of the network, and it's one of the key suppliers of metal into the network. Perth Mint here in Australia, one of the biggest mining refinery in the world based here in Australia. Imperial Group, Melbourne Mint, and several others as well that are also based in the group that all provide metals into the system. The key model for Meld Gold, which is where it's different, is it has these multiple partners, more to do with where is the best place to acquire. So geographics actually can be quite important to different supply lines at different times. So for example, sometimes gold can be quite hard to get in one country, but easier in another. And we see a disproportionate in price. We see a slight premium or a slight discount in different regions where we see someone oversupplied and someone undersupplied. So that's Meld Gold's key business model, is it's around making sure the metals are distributed globally and taking advantage of where there is arbitrage geographically by having partners across different parts of the globe.
Gotcha.
So most of the gold you see entering the ecosystem is from one of these partners. If you turned up and brought metal in yourself, long term, we'd like it to be, you can do it in more locations, currently just one, but if you brought it in yourself, it would be verified. So it would go through an XRF and a specific gravity test and an X-ray test to ensure the metal is all consistent and correct and accurate to what you've said it is, and then you'd be able to digitize it for a small fee and receive the digital tokens in exchange.
And I would imagine it would work somewhat similarly in reverse. So if I had some of these tokens, I could redeem them, presumably just in this one location now, but hopefully in more in the future.
Exactly. And so the key piece there is you would pay whatever the cost is above spot price for the fabrication premium, which would be the normal premium you pay on a gold bar. So normally when you're buying a 1 ounce legal tender coin, for example, the premium is slightly higher than if you're buying like a cast bar, because one, the cost of creating it is less, but also making it legal tender, there's a fee that gets paid to the governments of different regions depending on what the legal tender is issued in. So the premium just varies depending on the actual bar of choice. So I think long term too, there's a couple of versions of how we sort of see Meld Gold operating in terms of redemptions. Where I think we're probably most likely going to end up is gold is as good as any currency. It's fully liquid. It has full velocity. You can trade it. There's no different in terms of spread as to what you can trade FX. So with that in mind, I think what we'll probably end up really focusing on is creating payment rails to allow gold to be used as a currency. So it won't even necessarily be that you're going in and taking in your gold tokens and getting the specific bar that's backing those tokens from a specific location. It'll be that we'll work on the idea that bullion dealers globally will accept it as a payment currency to purchase the bars, because then you're really only paying the premium anyway. So that's where a lot of the energy is going to be focused, to really make it so we could adopt 500 global bullion dealers and you could actually redeem in most countries of the world pretty quickly. That'll be a far quicker process than going down the other route of actually trying to distribute it to every country in the world. So that's going to be where our focus is on this next 24 months, is how we can really make that a reality.
Wow. Yeah, that's really cool. So let's move back a little bit to what you said in your prior response about the xNFTs, because I'm curious what these are. Giles and I were going to have a conversation about xNFT, and we're going to take that wherever we take that. But I'm curious to get your take before we have that conversation. What is xNFTs, and how does it relate to what Algomint is working and what Meld Gold is working on right now?
Yeah, so xNFT was kind of a concept where what we really see is we see some incredible artists out there creating great works. They don't really know how to distribute it, how to build their digital online presence, how to really grow that audience, how to make their NFTs valuable. It's not an easy task. And look, traditionally in the art space, this is where galleries came in. They were the experts in terms of hosting collectors and actually hosting events to build up an artist reputation and create that supply and demand side of things and help manage that.
Right.
And so they were really these strategists in the art world that would help actually create profiles and create artists. What's super interesting with NFTs is I think we've really opened up a very level playing field in terms of access to bring your art to the world, right? So what we've done is we've gone, it doesn't matter where you are in the world and what you're doing. If you've got the internet and you've got a computer and you can create art and make it digital, you can get in market with your creations and start selling them. Where we're really kind of lacking is how artists go from, all right, I've got stuff, to now I need people to want it and to then want to keep it and to then value it and do those other pieces of the puzzle. And in reality, it's no different to any product, right? Like anyone can create a product, and whether it be a t-shirt range or something else, you still need the market to want it. It's not a case of build it and they will come. You still need to do those other key pieces to be successful. So what that really meant was there's a lot of really talented artists out there that don't really have access to an audience. And so for xNFT, the original concept was, okay, we can actually access some incredible people doing some great things. Why don't we do that? And we can help value them, and we can help create that value side and manage some of that value side. And then rather than selling them, they could actually be given away, which, was a really interesting idea of let's bring NFTs into DeFi. So instead of he coming along and purchasing one, though you could go and purchase the next NFT token and then go in and shuffle and grab an NFT. The idea was you could actually earn artworks by participating in DeFi in fractional format. And then naturally what ends up happening with the XNFT token is it essentially becomes a representation of a portfolio. So currently all the XNFT tokens out there actually represent two collections. But if you can imagine, we fast forward 12 months, 2 years, 3 years, the XNFT token will represent a portfolio of all different kinds of artists, different types of artworks, different intrinsic values in terms of what is in that portfolio. So I think we'll see quite a diverse range of works that'll end up going through XNFT. So holding that token is a really liquid way of actually holding an NFT portfolio without actually having to have a wallet with 100 different artworks, trying to work out, or if you does have a time to sell, how are you going to sell them, what are you going to sell them for, managing that whole process.
Hundreds of algos locked in your wallet.
100%, yeah. And then if you do sell them all, do you go back and you go, right, I'm going to unlock and opt out of all these assets and get those algos back, and all of that sort of stuff, which I don't know that anyone does. But it was really sort of looking at solving some of these problems collectively, and I think it's actually done that in a really interesting way. I think where XNFT goes next, I think there's a lot of really cool options, and I know that Giles and the team have got some really good ideas about what's to come next there.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm excited to have that conversation with him, and I really appreciate that quick rundown. It'll definitely help me with my conversation with him. But that's a really cool concept to have a portfolio. And of course, blockchain is, as we mentioned, really fit for purpose for this, because you can do this with really anything. But to have a portfolio of art, it's something that people do in the normal world all the time. And it's actually something that is somewhat digitized, although not necessarily in the way that blockchain can enhance it. There's usually middlemen that charge really crazy fees for this type of service. I think that's actually kind of a groundbreaking thing. Is this happening anywhere else in the crypto landscape? I know this seems to be the first on Algorand, but is there anything else in the crypto more broadly that's doing this?
Look, not particularly that I've seen, and not in with these kind of dynamics, I think, in place. So, I do think, though, like, to some degree, where some of this idea originally sort of was born from as well, was the concept of artist in residence. Are you very familiar with this, JT? So traditionally, like, especially if we go way back, artists who were up and coming, who didn't have a lot of money, they would essentially end up with a wealthy benefactor. And the benefactor would pay for them to live somewhere nice that was, inspirational in terms of it'd be somewhere beautiful out in the countryside or something similar. Everything was paid for. They'd have 6 months, 12 months, whatever the time frame might have been, where they just get to do everything creative they want and really hone their creative energies and create artworks. And as a part of that process, the benefactor would own all the work that was created in the time. And for a lot of benefactors, it was a really cost-effective way to actually acquire a lot of art. Because there still is an investment, right? They're still in banking on the idea this artist is going to be something interesting one day. So in that kind of a concept, the artist gets a surety of, okay, I've got an earning, I've got a living for a period of time, and I get to hone my craft. And the benefactor gets access to a whole heap of artwork that would be fractional in cost. So to some degree, this is where it was born from, the idea that we actually find artists that are up and coming, and there's a cost associated with them creating the work, and you create a lot more value than what is actually output originally, but there's certainty for both sides. So that's kind of where it was born from, and I don't think we've really seen that in a meaningful way elsewhere in blockchain. And then the layer of where Meld Gold really sort of came in, and a bit of my background, there's a company called Collectors Universe. It's the largest collectibles company in the world. It's based in the US. My original company is a distributor for them for Australia, so it distributes a lot of their products throughout Australia, which is physical product. But they're the world's biggest certifier. So they certify trading cards as PSA, if anyone's familiar with PSA, and they certify coins and banknotes as PCGS. So as a part of that, competitive collecting is a really massive component of what drives that collectible space. So whether it's you're owning, the highest graded Charizard Shadowless, Series 1, or whether you're owning, the world's finest, 1800s sovereign, these things change the value greatly through the competitiveness of collecting. And most of the awards with competitive collecting, especially in the PCGS world, it's kind of status, in the sense you basically earn a little badge on your account. That's it's not an NFT. You can't take it anywhere, but you get the recognition that you've done incredibly well as a collector. So the idea of where Meld Gold really dovetailed in was, let's take some of those learnings, and that whole area has really been crafted and very well battle tested over the last 20 years. Let's take some of those learnings and apply it into NFTs, because we haven't really seen this competitive collecting piece roll out yet. So the idea of creating a way for people to actually compete in their collections and battle it out to try and have the best collection of different NFTs and then be awarded for doing so, we thought was just a really interesting concept. And then the reason why Meld Gold was such a good fit for that, and I'm obviously very passionate about that whole collectors area. So the reason Meld Gold was a good fit for that was the NFTs you're winning in the gold and the silver. The bronze is more just your classic collectible, but the gold and silver have an intrinsic value. So you weren't sort of earning another digital piece of art, even though the coins themselves are beautiful and beautifully designed. You're actually earning something that also had intrinsic value, which we thought was more fitting with the idea of winning an award or a medal. It kind of felt like a really good fit.
Fantastic. Yeah, that was a brilliant explanation again. But I just want to talk about Algomint real quickly, because Algomint, of course, mints GoBTC and GoETH, as well as GoUSD, a basket of stablecoins. There was just 1 million transactions of GoBTC that just passed maybe a handful of hours ago or maybe a day ago. What's next for Algomint? Are there other top ticket tokens that are going to be minted on Algorand soon, like maybe Avalanche, or I know Wormhole Crypto is doing that as well, but what's next for Algomint?
Yeah, so I don't know if we passed 1 million, JT, but if we haven't, we are definitely very close.
I saw the post, so I don't know if you didn't have anything to do with it, but
well, I think the post was in celebration for the impending 1 million that's due very
well, maybe
shortly.
by the time this post it'll be 1 million.
Yeah. With the volatility at the moment, you're probably right. So where Algomint really differs from other bridges like Wormhole is bridges like Wormhole actually bridge single assets to single assets. So what I mean by that is if you actually take USDC on Solana and USDC on Ethereum and USDC on Algorand and bridge them to a chain, they all actually come out as individual tokens that are specific to the chain they originated on, which means you can end up with multiple versions of the same wrapped asset on the one chain. What Algomint wants to do is actually bring them all into a single standard, into a single asset, and aggregate them into a single standard. So GoUSD represents multiple trusted USD assets, where if you're coming into Algorand, you're not seeing this huge fragmentation of liquidity. You're actually able to have it all condensed into a single pool. And then to be very efficient, Algomint allows you to move between those assets as well. So where it also benefits sort of long term is we can see new assets that are born. So say we see assets that are geographically based. So we see a USDC out of other countries. The ability for those assets to find traction, if they've got a good trusted team and a trusted process and a standardization that can be trusted by Algomint, it can instantly gain access to a lot of liquidity by being included into the basket. Which just really opens up those rails to move around seamlessly in other parts of the world. We also really like the idea of including other assets like XUSD and DAI. We actually haven't been able to include DAI only because it bridges across with 8 decimal places, which actually poses a problem with stable swaps in Algorand currently. Because I would love to include DAI. I think it would actually be a great inclusion in the basket, but sadly not something we can do currently, but hopefully something we can look to for the future.
Yeah, it's really interesting. What's the from the technical standpoint, I don't think I understand the issue. Could you actually explain what the issue there is?
Yeah, so DAI has a lot more decimal places than 8 on the ERC20 side. Wormhole does like a standardization of assets. So USDC has traditionally 6 decimal places, so does USDT. DAI has more. Wormhole automatically standardizes it down to 8 decimal places when it comes into Algorand. Where it sort of plays a bit of grief is in the actual contracts. It sees it as a longer number and struggles with the idea of where the decimal place is located. I'm sure for anyone technical, this is a terrible explanation, but essentially the length of the number is what causes the issue. You end up with DAI being 2 numbers longer, even if it's actually signifying the same amount. They're just 2 zeros on the end, and this is where it can cause issues in the contracts.
Gotcha. Yeah, don't want that. So I want to move on a little bit to talk about crypto more broadly, because you have your hands in a lot of different pots. There's a lot of things going on. Basically everybody, at least in the Algorand space, and a lot about what's going on in the space. And sentiment's changed. It does seem like we're back in. I don't want to necessarily say we're back in a bull market, because this isn't a financial advice channel or anything like that. But it does seem, based on sentiment, that investments coming back in, liquidity is coming back in, transactions are going back up, we might be reaching that time where new projects are launching that might have been waiting on the sidelines for better price action and sentiment to be there and more investment to be there. What are your thoughts on the current state of the market right now? And then I'll, ask some more questions from there.
Current market, is really looking a little bit more interesting, looking a little bit more exciting. In this last sort of week, we've seen a huge uptick for the Algorand price, which has been great to see. The repercussions of that have also, it's been great to see volumes on things like, the DEXs, Tiny Man and Pact and Humble have all seen, huge increases of volumes due to liquidity, due to the price volatility, which has been brilliant. I think for a lot of projects, it has been a very, very tough bear market. And it has really meant that, launching tokens has been a very, very tough task. Finding funding has been incredibly tough. Really trying to find revenue as well has been very tough. It's not like we've seen huge activity on chain that's really driven the ability to be sustainable just through organic revenue. So it has definitely been a really hard place for a lot of projects to be. I think for most of them, the focus has really been on how do we be as lean and as efficient with a lean team as possible. We've seen the Uber XL theory in play, where if your team can't fit an Uber XL, it's probably too big. So we've seen a lot of this kind of thing playing out. I don't know if you've heard that one before, JT, but it's one, you sort of hear a lot, or if you can't share a pizza, you're in trouble. It's these kind of concepts that we're seeing play out a lot more at the moment. And it's certainly something that we encourage a lot of teams, be really mindful of your burn rate. You've got to be really careful about what you're spending money on now, which has been great because a lot of these teams that have worked through this period are coming out, very lean, very fit and battle hardened to some degree, and that they really know what they can produce when they are being lean, efficient and focused. So the other key piece then has been focus. Where should energy be spent? And for most projects, the energy has been spent on how do we create things that are going to drive user adoption, going to drive more revenue, going to drive more on-chain activity. How do we sort of create meaningful value for the protocols themselves? So what this has meant is, you've probably seen less tokens going live because that's not necessarily a driving factor. And, in fact, it can be sort of a negative return on investment for most projects, in that the token value is going to be much lower, which means they've got to emit a lot more to get the same kind of value. So we've seen a lot of projects that have been less focused on the token and, governance around a token, and more focused on creating value inside the protocols themselves, and how we can sort of make a more meaningful product that's going to be better positioned, for better times in the market. So look, it definitely feels, like we're seeing a lot of good activity. The market price is probably the easiest thing to point to say we're seeing better times. But we've got a way to go. I try not to jinx myself at any point. So, we'll see what 2024 holds.
Yeah, absolutely. It might be too early to tell it, but I do appreciate the sentiment change. I mean, not only for the price action, of course, I'm sure we're all appreciative of that, but also the sentiment is important. When we go on Twitter every day or wherever we go to communicate with our fellow crypto friends, and sentiment is just below where it should ever be. It's depressing. You almost want to tune off, and then you kind of become disconnected to these communities that you were once a part of, because it's sometimes a depressing place as it got over the last 2 years. A lot of I won't dive too deep into that, but are there other projects that you know of that are waiting to launch their tokens? I know I just spoke with Folks Finance. That video is coming out soon. It's probably already out if you're watching this. And they're planning on launching a Folks token. Of course, they didn't say when, but they are planning on doing it. But are there other projects that you're aware of that are waiting to do the same?
Look, I think most of the projects who have a token in the roadmap, are waiting. Any that were planning on launching in 2023 or 2022 and didn't launch are really focusing on when is the right time to launch, and what is the best way to launch, which is also, like, particularly if you're an Algorand based project, it is a little bit harder because getting ASAs listed on major exchanges is more difficult. There are some additional hurdles, and I think the community is kind of familiar with that, but maybe not as familiar as how difficult a task it really is. what the costs involved in listing with some of the exchanges actually look like, which also makes a harder task, especially when you've been going through a bear market and funding is tighter than usual. So, there are some pretty core problems that they still have to deal with coming up to a token launch, even in better times. But certainly, I think a lot of the projects who you would have seen, so whether it's Tiny Man or Folks Finance or any of these other projects, they're all looking at what their plans are for 2024 and when a token should be released. So ideally, what we sort of see is a really strong market improvement to continue, and we see a whole heap of new tokens coming into Algorand, which creates a whole range of new and additional activity. Which I think would be really exciting. It'd be great to actually see things, really picking up. And even this last 30 days, Meld Gold's a great example. It's heading towards 60,000 transactions for the 30 days of Meld Gold assets, which is brilliant considering that's 1/3 of its total historical transactions have been in the last 30 days. Which is great to see. And we're seeing that with a lot of other assets, that uptick in volume has really increased. xNFT is another good example. It's somewhere around 110,000 transactions of xNFT now. Really? Which I would suggest, even though it's the fungible version, it would make it probably the most used NFT related asset in the Algorand ecosystem. And, it's sort of less than 6 months old, which, it's great to sort of see some of that activity really picking up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's great all around, because one of the things that, we've mentioned maybe even just a couple minutes ago in this episode is one of the issues with the bear market is your runway gets shorter and shorter, and this activity, the volatility, the revenue generation from the activity, it's certainly going to help at least a handful of projects add maybe at least a couple more months to their runway, if not more, as long as this activity continues to increase, or at least even stays steady at this elevated pace relative to what it was at before. But I'm curious, if we want to talk about Algorand a little bit, because we mentioned a few things Algorand related, of course, and we talked about crypto more broadly, but I want to talk about some of the upgrades that Algorand has done, more specifically the move to add Python as a coding language. I know Algokit, whatever version is coming out, 2.0, 3.0, I'm not sure, is coming out tomorrow, Monday, so maybe 2 days ago if you're listening to this now. What are your thoughts there? Is this something that you think is going to be a huge net positive? Is this something that is just going to have good effects but nothing too huge? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I've chatted to John about it a couple of times, and I'm a big believer in John. I think he's brilliant. He's I think he's been such a great addition to the ecosystem. So very thankful to have him in Algorand. And look, I think he summed it up really well, which is one of the key factors is if you're an existing company that has a tech team, and you're not overly familiar with blockchain, you no longer need to learn a new language. You need to learn a whole heap of additional skills. You need to still understand the logic behind, what a smart contract does and how it functions. But in most cases, most teams will already have the ability to program in Python, which will mean with the future plans of where they're going with the development around the Python edition. It'll mean most tech teams, globally will have someone in the team, if not multiple members of the team, who could actually start building and delivering smart contracts on Algorand, which is pretty exciting. And I think sort of keeping in mind as well that most companies that are going to come on chain, for a lot of them, they aren't developing really complex things. They aren't developing really, really complex smart contracts that are doing really, really intricate transactions on chain. For the most part, it's going to be things like loyalty programs, ownership of different products, different rights, digitization of different documentation, or digitization of different assets that are in a different format that can be database. So for most companies out there, the utilization of blockchain is actually going to be a fairly simple implementation. So with that in mind, I think this kind of a piece combined with taking this out there and actually helping onboard some of these companies and actually getting them started and showing them how easy it's going to be, will be some pretty major steps towards bringing hopefully a whole new series of businesses on chain. We actually just ran the South by Southwest Algorand stand here in Australia. South by Southwest expanded and doing it in multiple places around the world, but that was really one of the big key differences we saw at a conference like that, which is not a crypto conference, it's a tech conference. Most of the companies were intrigued to say, okay, well, if I want to do this, what does that look like? And something like this changes that conversation dramatically, because currently you need to have your developers upskill, in PyTeal, in something similar. or you need to go to a specialty dev house who's got the skill set to be able to offer this. These are all sort of things that immediately go, this seems a lot harder. Right. Which, keeping in mind, unless you're already really committed and you really have true belief in delivering something on chain, your immediate is, okay, this is something to keep in mind versus this is something we could action today. So I think that's a really key differentiator. And AJ says this in the investment world a lot, and it's always sort of rung true for me, which is, investors are always looking for reasons to say no. Is there a reason why someone shouldn't invest in you? That's the thing that they're looking for. Is what's the easy thing to go, okay, all right, no, that's not something for us. Let's move on from that. And I think it's actually very similar because in many ways, this is an investment. Companies that are going to build on chain, they're investing in a new technology and investing a lot of expense in building out products on blockchain. So a reason to say no or a reason to say not right now often can be a lot more powerful than other things.
Right. Yeah, absolutely true. So, Michael, we're coming up on the top of the hour. I know I don't have you for too much longer, but is there anything you want to bring to the attention of my audience before we take off here today?
Oh, God, I don't know. That's a good question. I probably should have thought about that.
That's okay.
Look, I think the only other one that I think is probably particularly interesting is inside Algorand in particular, we've got a lot happening on the governance side, which I think is great. We're seeing a lot happening around the consensus side, around the TDR. I think it'd be great to see maybe some more debates in the ecosystem. I feel like we probably don't see enough debates out there. I don't know if anyone managed to tune into Polynize actually held a debate down at one of the recent blockchain events. It was great to see. And the debate was about whether DAOs are the future or whether, they are a false god. And that was super interesting. 2 teams of 3 debating about the pros and cons of DAOs.
Now, what kind of debates would you like to see? Sorry to interrupt. What kind of debates would you like to see if we could maybe play a small part in creating more of these?
Mate, for sure. So I think a really good example would be, is DeFi the future of finance would be a great debate. And the reason why I think debates are particularly interesting for these kind of topics is, one, you get 2 sides that will argue the point who, traditionally, if you've constructed a good debate, they'll be knowledgeable, they'll understand the topic, which means they hold the other side accountable, and they also can pull at different threads or different pieces of data or different points the other side are making, which, as an audience member in a debate, what you really get to do is it really helps you analyze and sort of think through these different pieces and come to your own conclusion from the information you hear. So, basically it's a very condensed way of having 2 people battle out all the questions you might have, all the pros and cons, pull at different facts, which is the accountability piece is important. If I go, all right, Algorand is the greatest blockchain in the world, the other side of the debate team go, well, hang on, you can't just say that, why? Give us the data points, what are the facts? And then it really gets you as an audience member, you get to really then feed into whatever those different data points are and those different ideas are and those different arguments are. So, I think these kinds of things are incredibly useful. What's the future of Algorand governance? What should governance look like? What does governance actually look like? Are polycentric systems the best systems, which is generally the consensus currently, or should we be looking at other governance systems? Does token-based governance work? These kind of debates I think would be super interesting. And I think for most people out there, they don't really have a solid conclusion as to whether they do or not. And they're probably lacking the facts to understand whether what is actually the right answer. So I think debates can often really distill that nicely.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's one of the more fascinating things about the blockchain ecosystem more broadly is that it is kind of just it's a testing ground for all these different ideas because, especially governance. I mean, this is something that humans have been trying to figure out for thousands of years. I mean, I don't know if we'll ever say that we've perfected governance.
We haven't solved it yet, right?
Yeah, we definitely haven't solved it yet. So it's nothing you can really blame these crypto projects for not being able to solve when no one else has really been able to solve it yet either. But yeah, those would be fascinating debates because I do have my concerns about token related governance. But yeah, that's, I'm going to keep that in mind and definitely maybe reach out to a few people and see if we can set up some debates.
Look, a very good one for governance, and I often feel like this is very true. I find governance on scale is always where the problem starts to really come into place. You think about any time you've solved a problem on a very small scale, so that be with 2 family members that are arguing, or that be with friends you're having an argument about a particular topic. Right. You can often come to a conclusion that maybe not everyone feels ecstatic about, but you feel like it was a fair and reasonable decision considering. It's once we really start to scale those things out where it becomes very, very difficult. And so much of that, I think, is based on trust within the parties that so whether it be the leaders that you're voting on. I think for, myself, and I've said this on podcasts in the past, I really don't know, who any of the governing leaders are in reality. I know who they are in terms of what's portrayed publicly, but I really have no actual true indication of what they are like as humans. Whereas, when you make a governance call within a small group of people, you have an understanding of who that person is, and you have different elements of trust and understanding of what their knowledge base is and their skill set is. And that makes a huge impact on governing decisions that we're really lacking at scale.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we could probably talk about governance for another we could talk about this for 2 or 3 more hours. We'll definitely have to have you back on the show. I mean, maybe you might be part of the governance debate if we do host one of those. Michael, I know you need to get out of here, but I really appreciate you spending your time with us today. Really appreciate it. It was a very illuminating conversation on all sorts of things. If you enjoyed it, smash the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel. And Michael, hopefully we will have you back on sometime soon.
Mate, would love that. Thanks, JT.
Ladies and gentlemen.